Okay. This is the Drew Experience Show, the show that's 80% combat sports and 20% everything else. I can't even believe this is happening. This is one of the probably the highlights of 2021. You know, when I started this show, people said, you'll get a few guests on maybe, but you'll probably burn out and not do it. Well, you know what? As Tito Ortiz gave the middle finger to Ken Shamrock back in UFC 99, today, to everyone that doubted me, well, you know what? I don't care really. It's not about that. But you know what? Today I'm joined by one of actually the biggest name on the show. He's the first manager I've had. He's represented clients such as Pannie Kianzad, Alex DeMauler Gustafsson, Costello Van Steenis, and one of my personal favorites, the guy who got me into martial arts, Gegard Mousasi. I'm joined today by Moments Management owner and founder, Nima Safapour. Nima, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, hi, Drew. Thanks for having me. And that was a really great introduction. I'm going to record it and show it to everybody. I'm very humbled to be on your show. I know you have a new program, but it always starts from somewhere. So I'm glad to be able to make a little contribution, and I'm really honored to be here. And I commend you for starting a program. It's not easy, especially with all the doubters out there. So it always starts with one, and I'm sure that with your perseverance and your diligence, you're going to have a lot of really great guests coming on this program that are going to be far more interesting and famous than myself, because I'm neither. But let's have some fun today.
Oh, well, you know what? When a manager says they're coming on, that's a very big deal. And for you, I got to give a shout out to two people here. First, Andre Abdullah Benki, my friend from Brazil, the one that connected you and I. You know, he's starting something big with martial arts in Pakistan and elsewhere, so he's doing good. I want to thank him. And also my friend Reza Pedersen from Freya MMA, who was the one that really helped, get me into how to do better at podcasting. So those two really deserve a big shout out.
Gratitude is something we have to practice every day. So I think you're on the right track.
Perfect. Nima, you have a very interesting story because, you're Iranian, full Iranian. I'm half. My father, I sent you the picture of him. Although I was born in Canada, he was born in Tehran. But and we'll get to a bit of Iran, but before becoming a manager, you were a very successful lawyer. You went to UCLA, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes. I went to UCLA. Sorry, I went to UCLA for my undergraduate. And in the United States, a little bit different than some other countries. Other countries, you can go to law school directly from high school. In the United States, a law degree is treated equivalent to a postgraduate. It's a postdoctorate degree. Mm-hmm. So you have to actually go to an undergraduate program, and then you can apply to the postdoctorate program. And so it's 4 years undergrad and then 3 years for the law degree itself. So the BA I received from UCLA, and then I was really fortunate to go to Columbia University in New York, where I got my JD, which is my Juris Doctorate. So, and then from there, I came back to California. I sat for the California Bar, been a member of the California Bar since 2004. And my background is of a legal background.
Very accomplished. Not only that, but when you became a lawyer, I'm sure you were killing it because I could tell you have the personality and mindset for it. But eventually you became a manager in mixed martial arts. So how did that happen, and who or what introduced you to MMA?
Yeah, sure. Long story short, how I got into the business is quite an accident. And what I thought that was really unique at the time, but once I immersed myself in the space, I realized that a lot of the people on the business side accidentally found themselves in this business. So I think we got to take one step back and just say, how did a lawyer get into combat sports? And that the easy answer is that this lawyer, being myself, is a martial artist. So I started doing martial arts at the age of 16. and I'm 44, so that was a long time ago. I started doing martial arts at 16 years old. At around 18 years old, which was 1995. No, I'm sorry, 1993. I started looking at the UFCs, and then I started watching videotapes of the Gracies, the Gracie in action tapes, the Horian Gracie tapes, and then by fall of 1994, I did my first seminar with the Gracie family. And then in February 1995, I enrolled in my first jiu-jitsu class with Half Gracie and Caesar Gracie, actually, back when they were together. And Half has remained my teacher since then. So I've been with Half, and I'm one of his black belts. So what's interesting, though, is my academic education kind of expanded my martial arts experience as well, because I lived in San Francisco, I lived in Los Angeles, I lived in New York, and I was going to Brazil on and off all the time as well for many, many years. So wherever I went, I always found a jiu-jitsu school to train at. And back then it was very different in the late 90s as it is here. Like back then you'd have to drive 45 minutes, an hour sometimes to find your first jiu-jitsu school. And all the people teaching were straight from the fountain. So my teachers were Half and Caesar Gracie, Hickson Gracie, Hegan Machado, Henzo Gracie. I trained with all of these. I trained with Carlinhos down in Gracie Baja when it was before Gracie Baja left to come to globalizing. So when they had their factory down there. So I was never like a great competitor. I never even saw myself as a martial artist, even though I was. I didn't realize that later on. In my 30s, I actually realized that it's more than a hobby. But what was really enlightening about that experience in hindsight was that I got to be a fly on the wall in some very, very special rooms. And I got to get great experience psychologically about what combat is and how it should be from some of the greatest combat sports minds in the jiu-jitsu arena. So, and then of course, over 20 plus years of having this lifestyle, you start building a lot of friends that go on to become fighters and teachers and sponsors and promoters and referees and judges. And before you know it, inadvertently, without expecting to get into the space, you have this network of people that are in the space, right? So then that goes to 2008. I'm practicing law. I'm in the real estate business. I'm doing everything that I had planned to do since I was 12 years old. And then the economic recession hits, and it wasn't a good time to be in real estate, and it was an okay time to be in law. But I was also in a moment where I was looking for some change in my life. And by absolute accident, I had dinner one evening with a buddy of mine that I had trained with at Hickson's Academy 20 years before. And we still remain friends. And then he invited a gentleman that was fighting in the UFC at the time. His name is Anthony Hardonik, a Dutch kickboxer that had transitioned into MMA and was doing very good in the UFC at the time. And we just had a social dinner because we were just hanging out, and we started talking about combat and fighting. And I had a good knowledge of the space from a fan's perspective. I didn't go to events, but I watched events and I talked events and things like that, not on the business side, but just purely as a fanboy, let's say. And then, I kind of noticed, but I was in a suit, but my ears were a little bit broken. And I remember Anthony kind of looked and he's like, "How do you know all this?" And then I told him a little bit about my background. And then I saw my friend and him kind of look at each other, and they kind of like almost like telekinetically like had this conversation amongst themselves. And then they just looked at me and they said, "He's not managed at the moment." And I said, "Okay." And at that time, the climate was different because the UFC maybe had about 200 fighters on the roster, maybe 300 fighters on the roster.
Was this during like the early Zuffa days, like when Tough was around, or before Tough, when it was just about to blow up, when the sport was built around Chuck and Tito?
This was about that time. This was about 2000, 2007, 2008.
Okay.
So it was after Tough. But they were still on Spike Television. If you knew what that channel was, it was before their Fox deal. The wave was rising, and the roster had about 300 fighters on there, and the sponsorship market was really healthy. Like we did a lot of business doing sponsorships back then. Long story short, I actually declined the offer to manage him when they first offered it, and they said, "Why?" And I said, "It sounds really tempting. The timing is really good because in my life, I'm kind of in a moment where I want some change. I'm young enough and single enough that I can afford to make that change. But ethically, I don't think it's the right move for this gentleman. And because at the end of the day, this is his livelihood, and there's probably people with a lot more experience out there than myself. But the reality is that there were people with more experience. However, the sport, and even now, it hasn't matured at a level where there's a lot of really competent, ethical, educated people navigating in the space. So even though I didn't have a lot of experience, the gentleman that ended up hiring me as my first client, he had a lot of experience in combat sports in Europe and Japan. And there was a big criminal element in Holland and in Japan with combat sports. And if you had 8 fights in the UFC during that era, especially when the sponsorships were really healthy and you were a heavyweight, which he was all of those things, and you didn't have a manager, that meant there was a reason you didn't have a manager. Maybe it was a trust issue. And he had a trust issue, but rightfully so. Some people have a trust issue because they get scarred from a bad experience. And some people have a trust issue because they actually have good intuition. And this gentleman, who's still one of my dearest friends, and we talk to each other every week, even though he's been retired for over a decade, we ended up becoming very, very good friends. He had a lot of, and he's very much responsible for encouraging me to expand my position in the space, because I didn't believe in myself. It was sometimes you need other people to empower you to get to that place, right? And he was one of those individuals that empowered me. So long story short, he kind of sighed, he kind of was quiet, and then he just, with a very thick, heavy Dutch accent, he looked like Dolph Lundgren from Rocky IV.
My inspiration.
He just looked at me and he said, well, I don't have anywhere else to go. So, I said, okay, let's all think about it for 3 days. If we all decide to go forward, buyer beware, we're going to do this. We ended up doing it. I ended up getting him the biggest sponsorship package he had ever had in his career for his next fight, which doesn't say much because up until that point, he made zero money on sponsorships. But I think the real benchmark is the money that we made for him on that deal was relevant and of market to any deal that he could have gotten from an experienced manager. And then he asked me if I could be his full-time manager, both not only for sponsorships, but also for his fight contract. And I already had a guy who was on the cusp of going from being a developmental fighter to being a young veteran in the UFC, and that was my first client. And then he asks me, would I be interested in signing other fighters that would be interested in working with me? And then I asked him who, and then he offered Vladimir Matyushenko, who at the time, if you're an MMA fan, and that's the problem with MMA, it's a fickle business, so the fans forget really quickly. But Vladimir Matyushenko was one of the most decorated freestyle wrestlers to ever cross over to mixed martial arts.
The Janitor.
Now that is a connoisseur. So yes, he was IFL champion, UFC a contender. He was probably a guy that if he had been marketed better, he would have been 2 or 3 time UFC champion in reality. And then when I signed him, he wasn't in the UFC, but he was ranked 7th in the world. So immediately off starting in the business, I got a guy that was 8 fights in the UFC at a heavyweight, which is great because heavyweights are hard to come by, and he was a striker, so they loved him. And I got a guy who was in the top 10 in the world. I scored. There's a little bit of luck involved in everything as well in life. And in that respect, I was lucky. And then Vladimir and all these people I've remained, all my clients, knock on wood, I remain friends with. Vladimir ends up referring a few clients for me as well. He refers Jared Hammond to me. He had an Elite XC contract. So I end up, and Steve Magaleno, and then I signed another guy who was in Strikeforce that was an old training friend of mine and a dear friend of mine from Gracies Academy in San Francisco. So before I knew it, I had 5 fighters. So then I take Vladimir and I get him a UFC deal. I get Jared and I get him out of his Elite XC deal because that's another story altogether. And then I get him a UFC deal. And then before I knew it, within a few months, I had 3 fighters in the UFC, 1 fighter in Strikeforce, and then another fighter that I was developing in the regional circuits. And that's how I started. And that was and then it started, at first it was like a side hobby. And then it just started taking up so much of my time, especially with the sponsorship work, that I ended up quitting my job and just starting my first company, which was called No Limits Media Group. And that was my very first company. I had that for about a year and a half. By the way, that was really risky because in this business, even back then when the sponsorship market was really, really good, you started a company, unless you had an investor, you started a company with 15 fighters, 1 or 2 elite level fighters, 4 or 5 veterans, and then a bunch of developmentals that are all fighting at the highest leagues. Now you've got income. Now you've got a business. I started with 5. And, Vladimir should have been treated like an elite, but he was treated like an old school veteran. Anthony was treated like a veteran, and then the other 3 were treated like developmental up and comers. But the difference that I had was I had to eat what I kill. And since I didn't have that many guys, there was less that I had to divvy up, and the market was healthier with sponsorship. So I over negotiated every deal that I could get for them, which ended up meaning that I was getting above market numbers for these guys. So we had, from a performance perspective, we were performing really good. And then on a personal level, we just built a really great friendship amongst ourselves. I mean, traveling around the world, we were like this little bandit of fighters and manager, that we were just kind of doing things on our own terms and the way we wanted to do it. And it was kind of like, you guys can do you, we'll do us. And even though no one knew who we were really just proud of what we were doing. It was a really intimate experience that had a lot of purpose. It had a lot of purpose. And I think that's really important in work, is to have purpose. And my purpose has always been in this business. Sorry, I'm rambling a lot. But my purpose has always been in this business to find something that I can be entrepreneurial and take ownership of, but also something that I can be involved in an industry that's emerging, that I can be a pioneer in. And then also, most important, find a way to give back to the martial arts. And I've realized when you do martial arts long enough, it's really about what you give, more about what you give back than what you take. And I always used to think when I was younger, you could only give back as a competitor or as a teacher. And I've realized that's really not the case. You can give back in so many ways, even just being a good training partner and a good positive person inside of the academy. So management has been a way for me to give back to the martial arts, because my goal, whether I've been successful or not, whether people know who I am or not, because there's a lot of people who don't know me, but my goal has been to just show that we can do business in an ethical, clean, competent, experienced manner. We don't sliver through the grass, and that there's other options in this business rather than the con man or the unreformed criminal that's managing fighters, or the con man that's managing fighters, or the guy that's compromised and completely untrustworthy that's managing fighters. I wanted to be a part of that growth of the sport. That was my contribution. And because when I look at combat sports, I see us growing and emerging the same way the entertainment industry emerged in the early 1900s, or football emerged in the 70s and 80s, American football. There's growing pains that you go through before you become an elite level industry, right? And we're still in the process. I mean, we still have a lot more left to do. Okay, so I have that company for about a year and a half. At that point, I meet my ex-partners, and we start another company, which I'm one of the founding partners. And we start that company with 7 fighters. 5 of them were mine, and I was the only one with management and legal experience. And then we grew that company to about 40 plus clients globally, 20 plus in the UFC, and the rest were between Strikeforce and Bellator, and at the time WSOF and ONE FC. And it was one of the top 3 agencies at any given day, meaning depending on what day you asked, we were either 1, 2, or 3. 40 plus clients now is a mid-sized shop. Back then, it was one of the biggest shops you could have. I mean, was just the nature of the business. My responsibility in that group also, because I did a lot of traveling, was to build the international practice of the company. So I built a lot of the athletes in Europe and South America. And that's why till this day, I'll have people that I've known for many, many years, and they'll ask me, where do I live in Europe? And I go, I don't live in Europe. I live in the United States. Oh, well, you're always with the European fighters. We thought you were an expat living abroad. I said, no. Stayed with that company for about 4 years. And then everything kind of comes full circle, and it was time to leave. And I left with all my clients except for one. And I started my latest agency, which was about 6 years ago, called Moments Management. And we've built this company now from, God, back then we had 12, and now we're around 40 clients globally. Been able to build a nice infrastructure in here where, we've got great people. We've got Majdi Shamas, who's one of my partners. I brought him on as a partner, and he's become a really, really dear friend of the company, of myself, and he's become a great asset with the company. So I kind of run with this company with him, and it's just he and I, so it's very, very intimate. And the clients get access to me at all times, and and also to Majdi as well. I think at the end of the day, it's really about what you can give back and what you can do to help empower. And that's probably the part. I've always kind of been the guy that I've always wanted to just be able to do everything myself. And I don't really want to, I manage enough people that I don't want to have to manage partners or friends or client or employees, but I'm learning that part of the business too. That's kind of my growth spurt. And I think what I'm learning is no matter how much you want to empower your clients to be the best version of themselves, you also want to empower your business associates the same way. So that's been a really good learning experience for me as well.
That's awesome. No, really, like on all the names you named after, like Matyushenko the Janitor was famous for being a short notice replacement at UFC 33, the 9/11 show after 9/11, where Vitor Belfort was supposed to be on that show. He broke his hand, so they called Matyushenko to save the show. And Dana White still calls it the worst show he's done because of the pyro issues. The pay-per-view ended. It was like the first time they went into Vegas finally. So it's like, but it's a very important show nonetheless because there's that UFC and UFC 40. When people say, well, UFC 205 was the most significant because no, in my book, it's UFC 33, UFC 40, Shamrock versus Tito 1, UFC 52 with Tough, 100. Mm-hmm. Then you can talk maybe 205, but those are my 5 most significant events to build the sport.
You're a connoisseur and a purist. That's because it's funny. You see the average fans of today, and they won't be able to tell you who fought before McGregor entered the UFC, for example. Which I love film for example, and I've seen films left and right, and I've seen films really from the 80s on. And someone would say, "Hey, you're not a purist because you don't watch classical films." Like you don't know about the films from the 50s and 60s. So it's actually really impressive that you've really kind of made a point of being very knowledgeable from a fanatic's point of view about the early days of the sport. Because everything that's happened today is because of what happened before, right?
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, it's like, when I went, and for those who want to know, like if you have ESPN Plus, please watch ESPN 30 for 30, Chuck and Tito, because before Khabib, before Conor, before Anderson, before John Jones, there was Chuck and Tito. They were the ones that built the sport when Zuffa bought it, when they were in the hole, and not many people know that. They might see Chuck Liddell because of the third fight they had, but Nima, I mean, it's why I do the show. Like I want to give those voices the platform because people can't forget, because you said they're fickle. And it's funny, I used my history degree in school to do this show. And yeah.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I'm glad you've got that in you. You're a historian, and I really enjoy it. Right now, my new thing has been to enjoy kind of studying old histories from jiu-jitsu and judo, because there's the history that the Gracies told us. But there's another history about how Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu really started. And when you start learning about the alternative histories that are not taught to us from our teachers inside Jiu-Jitsu academies, you also start wondering, well, what about judo? And then you start to think about who are the founders of judo? And there's so many different ways to interpret history, because history is what? It's a set of facts and how you want to interpret those facts, right? So the facts are factual, the dates and certain things. But even now, a lot of this stuff in martial arts history hasn't been recorded. So unfortunately, we don't even have a lot of the facts to work with. We have a lot of theories. But that's another conversation altogether. I mean, look, we're talking about the legends, going back to what you're saying. We're talking about the legends of the sport. So yes, Randy and Chuck, but what about the Maurice Smiths?
Frank
What about
Shamrock.
the Frank Shamrocks, the Hoist Gracies? If you really want to dig deep, what about the Chemo Leopoldes and God, there's what was Keith Hackney and like the guys that really those first shows where it's just you were either a WWE guy or a martial artist watching a circus, an absolute circus. And then the Fertitas came in and they really cleaned up the sport. They really structured it. But every milestone is meaningful. I kind of think it's unfortunate that a lot of the history is focused on the Fertitas purchase going onward because
There's the SCG. There's the SCG, Bob Meyerowitz.
yeah, that's right. I think if you really want to be a purist about the history, you have to really, and it's not even a lot of history, by the way. It's 25 years. It's not even like, oh, I'm asking you to go back that far. I mean, but what's really funny is that I remember fights from 1993, but I can't remember fights from last week.
Yeah.
You know, but the names are starting to lose my head. I got to refresh my memory.
Of course. So, when you became a manager, that's what I think is the golden era. It's between 2005 and then 2014. Now, the reason why I say that, Nima, is because 2005 tough blows up. You have stars like Chuck Liddell, George St. Pierre, Anderson Silva coming in, Brock Lesnar in that period. I could just ring off all the names: Gegard Mousasi, John Jones, Alex Gustafsson, to name even more. Shout out to your clients, by the way. Just wanted
Thanks.
to say that. There was a time, and that was the golden period, because 2014 was when GSP left. I'm not gonna lie, man. I felt that the sport kind of went for a bit in 2014 because GSP was such a pivotal figure. When he stepped away after the Hendricks fight, it was weird, and yeah, so that's why you came up in a golden period. So my question is, what was it like to be a manager in that era with Strikeforce, Dream, UFC, Elite XC? Like, it's like you had so many of these promotions.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny because I've been in this sport 13 to 15 years. I've been in the sport actually longer than a lot of the more well-known managers, to be honest, by a little bit. And in any other business, 13 to 15 years is a respectable amount of time to be in a space. From a management perspective, from a sport, I'm a bit of a white hair. I'm a gray hair. Even though you don't see any, because the burnout rate in the management space, because it's so difficult to be a manager and make this thing profit worthy. Most managers burn out in 2-3 years, so it's really hard to find a lot of old school guys. There's only so many of them, and a lot of them are not even very. A lot of them are just real, yeah. So I don't want to get into the quality of the work, but what I'm saying is there's not a lot of guys with a lot of experience. Look, there is a golden age. And before I answer your question, I think one thing that really came to mind with what you were saying, I was talking to Burt Watson many years ago. You remember him? Burt Watson was basically the handler to the UFC stars. He was the guy that was he was the guy that organized all the pickups from the airport and, getting the fighters to the arena and making sure the fighters had everything they needed during fight week. And his personality, he's a great guy. And his personality, if you want to have a really good interview, you should get with this guy. I mean, his personality is so strong and so dynamic that he literally would become a part of the UFC experience when you were coming to fight on fight week. And even in the locker room, like the night of the fight, he would lose his voice every night there was a show because he would be screaming, let's roll, it's fire in the hole, it's your time. He would motivate the guy to the point where we got to make a ringtone out of this guy. And before he got into mixed martial arts, he had a very rich history in boxing. He was Joe Frazier's manager. He did a lot of what he did for the UFC. He did in the boxing world. So he was a part of some of the greatest fights with De La Hoya and Cesar Chavez and the Muhammad Ali era. And from a combat sports perspective, this guy had seen everything in boxing, and he had been a part of all the milestones in MMA. And I sat down, and he became friends with everybody because he's a beloved figure in our industry. Too bad he left the UFC 6-7 years ago during that golden era that you talk about. But I remember one time, I was early in my career. I must have been maybe just 2 or 3 years in my career. And he and I were just chatting, and he was telling me about the boxing days. And I said, you've seen it all. You've seen it all. You were Frazier's manager. You were a part of every major boxing event and every single major MMA event. Which was the highlight of your career? And he said something that his answer was so profound and so wise. And it really actually resonates with me even more now because it kind of touches upon what you learn when you get a little bit older too, which is be present. We always look to the past because the past always seems so much more golden and so much more nostalgic. But the reality is, we're making history today. We're making history today. And what he said to me was, the greatest fights that I've been a part of, I'm making right now because I know years from now I'm going to look back and I'm going to be like, this was an era. But the reality is, and what the message that he was trying to give me that I'm not doing as well as him is be present because every era has something special to offer, right? And it's not better, it's just different, right? And just because we really love the past and we should love the past, don't forget we're doing some really awesome things right now. Right now, like this week that we're on Fight Week is going to be great, right? Like we could
so
maybe
excited.
Yeah, so it was so that's kind of my when someone said when you say that was the golden era, I say, look, tell me what you think 6 years from now. Let's have this conversation 6, 7 years from now, and let's see what you're going to be saying about 2021, or 2020. I mean, look, from a commercial perspective. So now to talk more directly about your question, that era was interesting because it was growing, right? So it wasn't like the SEG era where we were like worried about getting arrested if we did a show. Like I remember when I was a kid, Half did an event and it was like in Alabama or something, and the cops raided the hotel. And it was like not even like a cheap motel, and the fighters were jumping out of the windows trying to get away from the cops, right? Like back then, you were worried about getting arrested if you had an event. You're raided and arrested. So by the time I got in, we were no longer worried about getting arrested. At this point, it was kind of like that 18 to 45 demographic people were starting to figure out that, hey, there's this thing called MMA. And you would talk to someone about it, and not necessarily everyone would know about it, but there would be people that would know about it, and especially young people. So it was growing. And the money, you didn't do it for the money. And it was nice because you had a lot of options, right? But it was also so easy to enter the market, but it was really hard to stay in the market. It was a very difficult business. So even though you had more options for events, those events within a year or two were going out of business. Mm-hmm. Right. So there was a lot of liability associated, but it was fun. Like you could go to like a Bodog event in Puerto Rico, and it's not considered like a UFC event, but it's fun. It's like a cool regional show, and you're actually getting paid tens of thousands of dollars to be there. So in that respect, that was cool because now the best regional shows are paying you like 1,500 and 1,500 and they're not as fun to go to, right? So it's a lot more about just getting involved with the best shows and having as much volume as possible to make it sustainable, which is something that I've tried to stay away from having an exuberant amount of volume. I just don't think you can give the level of care that's needed to the clients if you have too many clients, right? Because at the end of the day, I can only delegate so many responsibilities. Clients are going to want to hear directly from me about conversations I have with the promotion and thoughts that I have about the space. So yeah, that was what it was like back then. Now it's developed, and I think with the growth of the sport, and there's different milestones that I can refer to that help us really from an algorithm perspective appreciate how much the sport has grown, right? From when you look at numbers that just get out there that can't be hidden anymore, like numbers like how much Conor makes, or how much the Fox deal was, or how much the ESPN deal was, or how much the sale of the UFC was to Endeavor. These milestones and these benchmarks and which is present day, it's a lot to be excited about because you realize, what, we are really in a growth of this, the growth potential of the sport is really, really big. We haven't even hit where we can possibly go. There's a lot more room to grow as it relates from a fighter perspective in regards to how much you can get paid, especially when you benchmark it or reflect upon boxing, right? Now you can say boxing's broken, and maybe it is, But let's say these fighters make half of the top UFC fighters make half of what the top boxers make. That's still something more than what they're making now. So there's a lot of things to be excited about. I think, and I'm sorry I'm rambling so much, but I think
I love it. I love these stories. It's like I'm learning so much from you.
I think the part of this business that I enjoy, there's a lot of things I enjoy about this business. I think the first part of that I really enjoy about this business, there's a lot of things I don't like about this business too. Well, but there's and I think some people that are good at this game, they have a love-hate relationship for it. But the things that I love about this business, keeping it positive, is I love the human relationships. I really love that. I'm an emotional guy. I'm a sensitive person. I know that about myself. And when I was practicing law, it was harder to satisfy that part of my personality because it was a very impersonal experience practicing law, unless you were a rainmaker, let's say. So in this respect, it's very intimate. You can build really good relationships if you vet your clients. If you're not just trying to work with fighters, but you're trying to work with fighters that you can build a human connection with, you can get really a rich experience emotionally from that because you pass Christmases and birthdays and holidays with these people. And whether you win or lose, you feel alive. Like on fight week, that nervous feeling you get, and it's a bonding experience. So that part of the business, I have to say, even though there's times I'm like, why am I doing this? Because I'm about to have a heart attack. Either way, I'm more alive than some guy sitting in a cubicle looking at a screen wondering what's going on outside of that cubicle, right? The other part of this business is the intellectual stimulation. I don't get intellectually stimulated by a lot of things in the sport. But when I step back and I kind of just study what's going on a grand scheme of the sport from a growth perspective, and I look at the sport as an emerging market, it's quite fascinating. And then when you start looking at this emerging market, because here's another comparison to the golden age that you so refer to. Back then, when I was practicing in this space, I always asked myself, where is the space going to go? Is it going to go to WWE? Is it going to go in the direction of WWE? From a commercial financial perspective, is it going to go in the direction of skateboarding and surfing, where only a few guys make money and no one knows about the sport? Is it going to go in the direction of WWE, where it's this big machine that's conquered by one organization and it's got this one clique group of fan base? Is it going to go towards football, where it's going to get global attention globally? Everyone knows who all the football players is. Everyone's going to know who the MMA fighters are. So that was the question I asked myself at that stage of where the sport was. Now I don't ask myself that question anymore because things emerge and change quite quickly over time. And now what I ask myself is, we're not going to go and be surfing or skateboarding. We're going to we are bigger than that. There's no skateboarder or surfer that's more famous than an MMA fighter, the most famous MMA fighter. There's how many Kelly Slaters come around anyhow. Like in the surfing world, they've got their heroes, but they haven't translated to the mainstream the same way the MMA fighters have. So the question now becomes, are we going to go kind of in the WWE direction? Or are we going to go in the direction of football, or basketball? And my hope and my goal for this space is that we go the other way, towards the really mainstream sports. And I think the libertarian in me doesn't like too much regulation, but at the same time, I think the sport needs more regulation. Because football is a team sport. And you can kind of find a balance because there's a team environment and people kind of bond together. Whereas fighting is like tennis, it's an individual sport, and the stakes are so high, so people are always looking out for themselves. So I think the future of this sport, for it to grow, hopefully there'll be more government regulation. And I'm not saying it's not going to come with its share of problems, but I hope that there's going to be more government regulation in this space, which will have more, barriers of entry for managers to become managers, and more, and it will even the playing field as it relates to contract negotiations and bargaining rights, and And then when the government gets in, that's when you can even have a discussion about maybe having a fighters association. And I'm very specific to say fighters association versus a fighters union, right? Because if you ever start talking about union, then you got to get past the first obstacle, which is, are they employees or are they independent contractors? You know, and then, so yeah, I think that's what it felt like in the past, and this is what it feels like right now. Yeah.
It makes sense. I couldn't help but ask this because we were speaking off the record. I had to tell you, your client, who's also like a family member to you, Gegard Mousasi, is the reason why I got into martial arts, and especially Kyokushin karate. So shout out to my coach, Mohammed Chikwa. I sent you a video of, he's not going pro, don't worry. But if you ever want to learn some kick-ass striking, I recommend him if you come to Montreal. But my question is, how did you meet Mousasi? Like, what was that like? And how did, like, because you've been with him for like a long time.
Yeah. We've been together almost 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
But, Renzo Gracie one time said, and I think he's a very poetic man, and he said one time, time is measured by the intensity of experiences. And I think that really resonated with me. But I would probably add to what he said, and I would probably say time is measured through the intensity of experiences and through the wisdom of one's perspective, right? And when I look at some of the relationships I have with my clients, whether it's Gegard or someone else, it always feels like I've known these people much longer than I have, because the intensity of the experiences that we share is very different than someone that you know in your office or someone that you know in your neighborhood. So even though Gegard and I and his family have known each other, let's say 10 years, it feels a lot longer than that. It feels a lot, because I mean, I've lost count how many places around the world that we've gone together. I've lost count how many fights we've done together. We've gone through the highs, we've gone through the lows, we've gone through, it's just, and our families have really bonded. It's been the relationship with him and his family has been great for my family financially. We've made a living because of the Gegard Mousasi business. That's the God honest truth. But there's also a very meaningful, spiritual, intimate friendship that we've built amongst ourselves and our families. That's what makes you a rich person. It's a relationship based on trust and gratitude and loyalty and respect. And I think those are the pillars that I look for in every relationship that I find myself in, whether it's my personal relationship, my personal relationships, my private relationships, the guy that makes my coffee a couple times a week, right? So and how did I meet Gegard? I met him through a referral from a previous client of mine.
That's crazy. And this is when Gegard was like the best.
In my old company, we had everybody. I mean, we had Rory McDonald, Jimmy Manawa, Stefan Struve, oh God, I mean, we had so many, Liz Carmouche, we had so many well-known, Brendan Shaw. We had so many well-known fighters in that second company that I helped build. But Gegard and I met through a previous client.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, like, I remember, I showed you that book. Remember, I said, this is the book I got when I finished university. And here's what happened with me. So my martial arts journey begins in 2014. So I went to California to meet my dad's family. I never met from Iran because it's like he passed away. Like, and the goal was like, if he was alive, we were going to go meet them. But my grandmother was like, it's straight out of a storybook. She's like, look, you have to go see them. She's like, they need to know who you are. You need to know who they are, because we don't know how much time's left. So I go down there. I went to a San Jose Sharks game because I was a big hockey fan at the time. But after that, I went to a bar with one of my cousins who trains out, I think, Carlson Gracie, like in Mission Viejo. That's where he lives. So we went to watch John Jones versus DC #1, and I was like, okay, like this is like the first fight I'm gonna watch. So like I was like, okay, I got into it and I was impressed with John's like IQ. 3 weeks later, the Stadium Series in Sweden, I see a guy named Gegard Mousasi fight Dan Henderson. It's the way he walks out, starches Hendo, and I'm like, okay, I'm going into martial arts now. It took some time to register, but then I bought that book, and then since then, like just the way he looked, like with that Iranian flag, because like I take my Iranian heritage very seriously from my dad's side, so that's why. So I saw that's what happened. Then the rest is history, Like I take Kyokushin, and then I meet my coach Mohammed, who I sent you a video of, and I'm being serious. Like if you've watched that video, would you find like you're a martial artist yourself? Do you find there's a similarity in their styles when you watch them? Because he does model himself after Gegard.
Uh, I have to rewatch the video, to be honest. So I don't want to. I didn't. I have to rewatch your
Yeah.
teacher's video. What I can tell you about Gegard is that he's the ultimate Ronin. He's like the guy that doesn't have a master. You know what I mean? So and that's why he's such a talent, is that he picked up a lot from the people that he's worked with throughout the years, in areas of boxing and judo. And of course, it helped that he trained in the Netherlands, because the best kickboxers are there. Now, remember, I think most of these K1 fighters come from that kickboxing style, come from that karate style that you participate in. So there might be a big influence in his striking because of that, with his kicks and whatnot. But Gegard is just such an all-around, well-rounded MMA fighter, and the coaching team that he has right now, they're great. Ricardo Vondel is one of his coaches, and they've done a lot of work with Gegard to just help expand his existing knowledge too. So, yeah, and Gegard has a huge fighter IQ.
Yeah, he's up there. I always said it best. It's like, and I'm paraphrasing what you said. These fighters only come around once a generation. The Anderson Silvas, the George St. Pierre's, the Gegard Mousasis, the John Jones. And I really wish people, appreciated what Gegard has accomplished, because it's like a five-star general. He's not going to be fighting soon. His window is going to be, everyone has as a sunset song. And I really wish, those who say they're fans, if you're really a fan and you appreciate fighting, watch this guy fight. Look up his fights versus Jacare, Melvin Manhoef, Dennis Kang, and Dream. Watch his fight versus Mark Hunt on May 31st, 2009, when he became Sherdog's top 3 fighter. And then there was a rumor of, Hey Sports said this, by the way, that in that Mousasi's road, they said that there was a time where they were considering Anderson versus Mousasi. I don't know how true that is, but man, I wish for you that would have been so fun to watch. Prime Anderson versus.
Anderson never wanted that fight. Anderson never wanted that fight. We lobbied for it aggressively, And look, you're right. I mean, Gegard, you get a Gegard Mousasi once every 7 years, 8 years. You don't get a guy like him very often. His skill set is, and everything that he has now, he's one of the highest paid guys in the sport. And I can tell you something, he earned it. I mean, he literally has nothing like, yes, we appreciate it, but like he earned it. I mean, you can't, if you look at his resume and look at the volume of fights he's done and the who's who of who he's beaten, he's earned all of the money that he's making now. Some would even argue that he deserves more. So yeah, and you're right. I mean, we're living in a space where people are really focused on the UFC, and I'm a big fan of the UFC. I have a lot of clients in that organization. I love working with them. But the reality is there are some really good fights going on outside of the UFC. I would, and this is me being pro fighter, and I'm not, and I don't think you can be an effective manager unless you can't be an effective manager if you're pro promotion. You have to be pro fighter. And when you look at fighting, like I'll use Bellator as an example. Bellator is a good example. Overall, their division is not as deep as the UFC's division. They're not as, they don't have as much depth, let's say, but they also don't have as much resources as the UFC. But the top 1%ers in the UFC, in Bellator, especially in most of the divisions over there, would give a hell of a run to the top 1%ers in the UFC. That is a true statement. I will almost want to go as far as say a factual statement, but we'll never really know because we'll never see a cross promotion. But what I can tell you is Strikeforce, when they went over, I mean, Scott Coker used to always say it to me, and he said it really, really well. He said Strikeforce was never a competitor for the UFC. We were never a competitor. We didn't have the same resources. We didn't have the same roster. But if you took all of our moments of greatness and you put all of those moments of greatness together on an aggregate level, we were a diamond.
They were. And he knew how to find that talent. Like Scott Coker knows how to find talent.
Now, you can say that's an opinion. Mm-hmm. But then when the UFC, Zuffa bought Strikeforce, at one point, every UFC champion was a former Strikeforce champion, except for Anderson. It literally went down the line. Every single Strikeforce champion, every champion was at heavyweight too. Yeah.
No. DC
at heavyweight. DC at light heavyweight, middleweight, Luke Rockhold, welterweight,
Fabricio Verdum,
Tyron Woodley.
Fabricio
Verdum. Lightweight was who was it at lightweight? Was it Gil Melendez? Did Gil ever become UFC champion? No, he didn't become. No. He had a terrible run. He had a terrible run in the UFC.
Yeah.
But he for some reason. But Ronda Rousey, like every champion, almost every single champion, at one point there was a certain point in time, and we got to go and fact check me. But there was a certain point in time where every champion except for one champion in the UFC was a former Strikeforce guy. So that's kind of how I see things now, in the sense that I look at the top 1%ers at the 145 division, the 155 division, the 170 division, the 205 division in Bellator, and I say, you put the top 1%, and of course, Gegard's division too. Like Gegard could become UFC champion right now because, you know, his style is very good for a guy like Izzy. You know, he meshes very, very well, especially if he's a sharp, active fighter. He matches up really well for Izzy. It would be a really fascinating matchup. So the reality is the top 1%ers could perform potentially really well. And if that's me being overly optimistic, then I will say this. Michael Chandler came in 2 weeks ago and debuted in the UFC, and he had an incredible debut. And guess what? There's a guy over in Bellator that knocked him out twice.
Patricio.
Yeah. So don't tell me that Gegard wouldn't have a great fight against Izzy. Don't tell me Patricio wouldn't have a great fight against Poirier or whoever's going to hold the belt. Don't tell me, at welterweight, Douglas Lima can't come in and make a good fight against Usman. Like these, don't tell me that Cyborg can't come in and have a good fight against somebody, like against Amanda Nunes. I mean, Amanda beat her fair and square, but that was the way they were throwing at each other. It was not a matter of, it wasn't one fighter outclassing another. It was just somebody's going to get knocked out. It's just one of these punches is going to connect, and it's going to be one of these girls. And I don't know which one. I was there. I saw that fight live, you know? But look, promoters have to promote. So unfortunately, we're living in a day and age where a part of promotion is, a part of our culture right now is kind of putting somebody else down in order to elevate ourselves. And we do that a lot, unfortunately, in business. I wish we could live a life of empowerment where we're trying to empower everybody, including our competitors, you know. But it's just, we're not living in a world where we do that. So it's just easy to just make comments like there's no one over in Bellator that I'm interested in, or just, you know, but it's just not true. It's just not true. There are good fighters everywhere. And the reality is we need all of these promotions to be very, very successful. We need the UFC to continue to kill it. We need Bellator to continue to grow. We need ONE to grow. We need PFL. We need all of them to be successful.
It's very true. No, like, and especially when you said about Gegard, like he left at the high point. Like he left on like a 5-fight win streak, which is unheard of in middleweight. And
5-fight win. Sorry to interrupt you. 5-fight win streak. He was ranked 3rd in the division, and he was basically next in line for a title fight
until George St. Pierre came back. But I guarantee you, Michael Bisping.
George is a welterweight.
Remember, but that time period, he came back in 2017. Remember?
Yeah. But okay, if you want to get
maybe I'm not too sure. You know better.
No. You're right. George came back and he fought Michael for the middleweight title. Okay, and if you wanna talk nitty gritty, that was one of the reasons that influenced our departure from the UFC, because Michael Bisping, who we all like very, very much, he's one of my favorite people, but he did good Michael Bisping business during that time he was champion, okay, which was great for Michael, but it wasn't good for the rest of the division. So when Michael won the title fair and square against an amazing knockout against Luke Rockhold, he thereafter put the division basically on hold and kind of held it hostage. And he did one fight against Dan Henderson, which was, Dan was not even ranked in the top 15. And then he held up the division forever just to get a super fight with George, who had never fought middleweight. So the reality is, I would have done the same thing if I was Michael. If I was Michael's manager, I would have advised for him to do the same thing. I don't look back at how Michael managed his career, his championship run. I'm not critical of Michael Bisping, but from a sport perspective, he wasn't fighting the contenders. And if you were a contender at that time, you were probably worried that you would have to unnecessarily put it on the line over and over again in order to get a title fight that you might not even get, even though you're deserving of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's yeah. But I love Michael Bisping. And I'm really happy that he had that success. He's a great guy. And at the end of the day, it really did work out. I mean, okay, it didn't work out in the sense that we didn't get the middleweight belt, and it was right there, and we would work so hard to get that middleweight belt. But it did work out in the sense that we went off, and Gegard finally started making money that he really, really deserved to make. And he got to reunite with Scott Coker, who he has a really, really intimate, great friendship with, as well as a great professional relationship with. And coming to Bellator, they've really promoted him well. So at the end of the day, it's, in the grand scheme of things, it's a game, it's a sport, and everyone landed in a good place. Even though we were probably going to become UFC champions. We were probably going to, but you never know.
I would have loved to see that. And I mean, like, I hope it didn't come off as controversial. And like I said that, because I know, like, obviously, like, I really am, like, when he left the UFC, like, part of me was a bit sad, but part of me, but majority of me was happy that he was going to get paid with a capital P, what he deserves. And I mean, this is my next question. You know, a lot of fighters go.
Sorry. One other thing. We were going to stay. It was just a matter of money. Mm-hmm. It was a matter of money and getting the title fight. And then we said, okay, fine. You guys don't want to give us a title fight. Just give us the money, the fair money. And when we couldn't get either, and the money that we got offered at Bellator was so appropriate, you know, it just literally came down to a business decision, you know.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. And, you know, my next question is, you know, you manage fighters, and obviously some of them go broke very fast. We've seen this happen not only with fighters, but athletes. As a manager, how do you help your fighters make good investments and manage? Because it's so easy to go broke when living the high life.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I will give you the honest answer. The vast majority of the fighters don't make enough money to really even save up. Even if they're, so you've got two issues. You've got two things going on. You've got fighters that are only going to make enough just to get by. And they better hope that they can stay on this train as long as possible, because only 1% are going to survive, and only 1% are going to make a career out of it. And everyone else is just going to find a way to get by. And let's not talk about what their lives are going to look like after. It's a very hard, unforgiving, thankless business. Anybody who tells you differently is being naive or painting a picture that's not true. That's the truth. Now let's talk about the 1%, okay? The 1% that can potentially create a life after fighting. And those are the people that you can help. You can't help somebody that has nothing. All you can do is with the people that don't have much is help them make good choices and remind them to live below their means. You know, and it's very hard to do that when they're winning, because I don't know, it's this weird psychology with professional fighters. at least professional MMA fighters, and I don't know if it's this way with football players or baseball players or whatever, but when you're winning, you have this like confidence and you have this feeling of euphoria and you feel like it's never going to end. You almost have this invincible impression of yourself, and you get reminded of it, of your vulnerabilities, as soon as you have that loss. But for whatever reason, I don't know what it is, like, especially when they're young, because they're young and they don't have a lot of work experience. They just think this money, these bonuses are going to keep coming. These paydays are going to keep coming. There's going to be a lot of UFC contracts that I'm going to have to be able to sign. This will be my first one. So they don't live below their means. They spend the money. So what I can tell the fighters that are coming up, now is the time for you not to have an ego. Now is the time for you to be humble, live below your means, reinvest. If you're going to put your money anywhere, aside from the bank, you reinvest it into your training as an investment. And you show yourself in the world that you're a guy that's not just going to blend in the crowd, but you're a guy that's going to make a long career out of this and maybe become a contender. Okay. So for the young fighters, I say put your head down, live below your means. If you're going to spend your money anywhere, reinvest it in your camp and just work hard. For the fighters that have the money, I say this. I say live below your means and invest every single penny you have. Whether it's invest, and don't invest in stupid stuff. Don't invest in your friend's car wash. Don't invest in your friend's apparel company. Don't invest in, don't do that. You invest in real estate. You invest in collateralized loans. Gegard is a great example. I mean,
Real estate.
Of course. But Gegard and his brother are the best. I mean, if you want to put a case study of how it should be done, you look at him. I remember there was one time the UFC came to film him, and they came to his home. This was his old home. And he still living with he still lives with his mother, but at that time, his mother and him and his father lived in the same apartment that they had moved into when they first moved to Holland, which was a 3-bedroom apartment that was subsidized housing given to basically refugees that moved to Holland, right? He was living there. And it was a very, very nice place, but it wasn't like super extravagant or anything, but a very nice place. We spent a lot of time there. I used to go live there and eat there. Lovely place. We had a lot of great memories, but it wasn't the kind of place you're just like seeing in the lifestyles of the rich and famous. Let's say it like that. And somebody on like the messages were like, look at this guy. He's supposed to be a professional fighter, and look at where he lives. And I laughed. Because when I read that, I'm like, you don't understand. This man has 40, 50 properties in Holland that he's renting out. He's like one of the largest landowners, And why? Because he always lived below his means, and every penny that he had, even when he wasn't making money, he invested in real estate. Now, of course, it was different because at the time, real estate market was different and the things were more affordable. So you've got to adapt to whatever current economic market you're in. But the point is this. Don't always assume the money's going to be there. Always live below your means. And if you're lucky enough to be one of the guys or girls that has a disposable income, invest it. Invest it. The same way when you train, you sweat now so you don't bleed later. Same thing with how you manage your money.
It's very true. Like, I mean, you've done so well. Like, I mean, look at Alexander Gustafsson, another case study, doing great. I mean, he really parlayed his fame into like other ventures in Sweden. He doesn't really need to fight. Yeah, he came back, but he's doing good, it looks. Pannie Kianzad, another one. You've done really well with her. Like, that's the women's fighters too. Like, so what's it been like managing her? Like, she's a Iranian out of Sweden.
She's great. We have a few right now that are doing well. Costello Van Steenis is ranked, and he's in a position for a title run. Ryan Hall is ranked. He's positioned for a really good run. Pannie Kianzad is ranked. She's in the position for a really good title run. We've got some young fighters right now that no one really even knows, but Manon Fiorot, she's from France. She just debuted in the UFC. This girl will probably be champion in a year and a half, 2 years inside the UFC. She's an absolute monster at 125 pounds. So, but going back to Pannie, like, I call her our one of our, I call her our unicorn and our ninja, She's a lovely human being. She's loyal, she's kind, she's empathetic, she's hardworking. She made a milestone in women's mixed martial arts because she's the first Iranian Swedish woman to be in the UFC. She's a great girl. Her coaches, her coaching team, they're amazing people. She's also been a great advocate of ours. I mean, we're a great advocate of hers, but she's also been a really, really great, sincere advocate of ours. We've gotten at least 2 or 3 client referrals because of her just saying, hey, these guys are good guys and they've helped me. So, yeah, she's doing great. I'd love to see her fight Juliana Pena next or Raquel Pennington. I'd like to see Pannie in the next 2 to 3 fights fighting for the 135-pound title.
Awesome.
I'd like to see Costello fighting for the title in Bellator in the next 1 or 2 fights. It's just a little tricky with Gegard and him both in the same division.
They're like this. They're like brothers.
Yeah, very much so. So that's a little bit tricky, but we figure it out.
My friend who I sent you a picture of, Wesley, shout out to Wesley Jensen from the Netherlands, the picture of him and Gegard, I sent to you, and he's met Costello too, and he's like, Costello is like, he's like, if you ever like watch this guy fight, which I have, I follow. As I mentioned, I'm a big fan. I mean, but Costello, I think, has that potential. He's got the perfect team around him, and that's the thing, Nima. I don't like the guys that are like, look, I respect DC. I don't like the good guys. I like the complex anti-heroes like the Jorge Masvidals, the Gegard Mousasis, John Jones. Yeah, I hope that I like. I'm sorry, I like John Jones, but I like him.
Gegard an anti-hero?
Yeah, in a way, yeah. Because I remember when he said that interview after the Vitor fight, he's like says out loud, he's like, what do I have to do to be noticed? Do I have to be Conor McGregor? Do I have to be like a fucking ginger?
Yeah. Yeah, he's very transparent. Gegard is he doesn't care about being famous. He'll just speak his mind. He throws diplomacy out the window sometimes.
That's why I love him. Pannie's a good, but yes, I do like the good guys too, like good girls too, like Pannie. She's an example of women, hard work. She's Baha'i, and Baha'i Iranians, they're of Baha'i descent. They've been through so much, the perseverance of that. That's something I'd love to like, if ever like I get a chance to speak with her, like I would love to hear that story. I think it's very important because I'm very passionate about Iranian history. I mean, I don't know what your history is with Iran if you were born there. I mean, I could tell you my father's story bits a bit, but yeah, you mean you really have collected like a storybook of like those like of clients, and they're you've like I really want to say it's really a big honor that like I'm speaking with you because like you represent half the fighters that I like to watch. Even Gus, to a degree, I love watching. He's just like Dolph Lundgren, man, in real life.
Well, that means a lot. It means a lot, not because I'm trying to sound like an aspiring narcissist. It means a lot because I'm really happy that there's people out there that appreciate my clients the same way I do. I think when I look at my clients, I see them as great human beings that just coincidentally happen to be elite fighters. And I think that's the perfect chemistry for me as it relates to being a manager, is connect me with that amazing person that I want to spend time with, that can just be a ferocious animal in the cage. And sometimes you need to be a little bit of that anti-hero. You need to be wired a little bit differently to be able to perform like that. So there is something about being a little bit, being one can short of a six-pack, which sometimes, a very famous former UFC champion who's a very, very dear friend of mine, Murilo Bustamante, he told me, you don't need to be crazy to fight, but it helps. So look, when you talk about the Nick Diaz's and the Masvidals of the world, look, when I see those guys, there is something intriguing about them, and what we say is they've got the it factor. There's a lot of great fighters out there, but how many of those fighters have the it factor? And unfortunately, Fedor had the it factor. BJ Penn at his prime had the it factor. Conor has the it factor. The Diaz brothers have the it factor. There's something above and beyond their fighting. It's their aura and their attitude. And unfortunately, I'd like to believe that you can have the it factor being a good guy or a bad guy. But unfortunately, and sometimes you have that. You have a guy like Fedor who's a good guy and he's got that it factor. But unfortunately, or you have a guy like Randy Couture who had the it factor and he was Captain America. But, unfortunately, the vast majority of the fighters that have that it factor, it comes with a little bit of toxic persona. You know what I mean? The Tito Ortiz's with the two thumbs, the two middle fingers up, or the Connors back before Connor was, the nice guy. And I get it because, and a lot of the times it's a persona. It's not real. Like Chael Sonnen was a persona. It wasn't real. And sometimes it's a persona and the man becomes the persona. They still, like, Connor had moments where he just kind of became his persona. It's like, wait, man, you become your character. Don't break people's cell phones. Like, don't be that guy. So, look, I get it. At the end of the day, it's entertainment before it's fighting. No, it's always fighting. It's entertainment before it's sport. We always have to remind ourselves that. So the reality is that's what sells. And as an older person, I'm not that old, but I'm not 25 anymore. I'm older and I'm a dad. Like, I kind of get more infusion of excitement when I see positive things, not negative things. But I also understand the game.
Yeah, I want to say congrats to being a new father, and that leads me. You just, like, I feel like the flow we have is like on fire, But congrats once again. How do you feel becoming a father has impacted you in the relationships, not only with your clients but with your peers around you and throughout your life?
That's a good question. Look, thank you very much. It's great to be a dad. She's been incredibly quiet today as well. So she didn't intervene in our chat. Let's put it that way. Look, some people have kids in their 20s. Some people have kids in their 30s. I had a kid at 44. I'm still very young. I'm a young 44, but I'm not 25. And in one respect, I'm happy that I had it at this age because I think it comes with a different level of maturity, right? And I don't know, and it also depends on your personality. I'm a very emotional, sensitive, feely kind of guy too, so that has something to do with things. But this first kid has been and I tell people it's been a real spiritual experience for me. Probably if we had a second one, it wouldn't feel as. I wouldn't be surprised if it wouldn't feel as spiritual, but the first one has felt really like it's been emotional, like in a good way, and in an empowering way, because now it's not just about who you think you are and what you think you want to be. It's really an affirmation of your value system, and you have to live that life more so now than ever before, because if I don't live that life with the value system that I hold dear to me, I can't pass that value system off to my kid with any credibility. I can't tell my kid to live a certain way if I'm not living that way. So you have to really, your talk has to back up your walk. You know what I mean? Your walk has to back up your talk, I should say. So in that respect, it's been really, really a great experience. That's how, it's allowed me to reaffirm my values as a human being and as a man. It's also reinfused a lot of focus. It's reinfused other things that I try to incorporate in my life on a daily basis, like gratitude and respect. And look, I got into this business to help clean it up. A part of me kind of thinks 15 years later was a little bit naive thinking, because I don't know if the business really wants that, at least at this juncture, But with that being said, I'm going to continue to work that way. I'm going to continue to live that way, because I think it's a good model to have in this space. Even if a lot of people don't know me, my clients that know me, they really value it. And even more so, I think it's important to have that core and that ethics for the sake of my kid, because I want to be a good role model. I want to be a really good, empowering, because everything now is about raising her to be strong, confident, independent, brave, caring, smart, so I've got to be able to do my best to be a good example of that. So more than ever, I kind of tie it up and just say more than ever before. Like I never interacted with con men or hustlers or manipulators, and now if I didn't have a tall if I kept myself away from those kinds of toxic people before, now it's like I don't even want to get close to them now. Now to me, I look at that and I just say that's toxic energy. If I ever interacted my energy with your energy, I would just feel embarrassed in front of my kid. So it's like in that respect, maybe it's not a good thing, or maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's not a good thing, but that's how having a kid has affected me because there's a lot of toxic energy in the business. And I'll say one other thing. I'm trying to let go a little bit more now than I used to. Before I would get really animated and really passionate about stuff to the point where I would get really lost on principle. And I'm really standing behind my principles now, but I'm also just trying to let go and just look at the bigger picture. You know, our health is the most important. Our ability to have gratitude for our loved ones and for our lives is really, really important. So I'm trying to live a little bit more with that kind of energy as well now since I have the kid.
That's awesome, man. That's a beautiful way of saying it. And I mean, I can relate because I'm an uncle to three nieces and a nephew. Now, the first niece was great, okay, cool. Then the two others, it's like, okay, cool. But then when the nephew came along, it was kind of like, it changed me. Like, it really did change me as a person because I never really had an uncle. My uncle, who I have, is kind of, he's out of my life. I don't really talk to him. So I want to give to my nephew what my uncle couldn't give. So I always try to, like, see him, even though with all the rules and COVID. And it's just, it's made me a better person, like he's really I've grown a lot, I've matured a lot, like I understand what it means to be like an example to children, especially my nieces. So I try to be an example to them, like through martial arts and through how my mom and dad raised me, how to be around your peers. So that's what it means to be like, it's not a father but being an uncle. It's like, especially to a nephew, it's the greatest joy that I have.
Yeah, well, you're a very family-oriented person, and you're a very brave, strong young man that clearly is pushing forward with a lot of confidence, while at the same time embracing your vulnerabilities, which I think is probably the greatest testament of courage, right? So, I mean, I think, look, we're the people that we put around us can either, empower us or they won't. So
Yeah.
put yourself around as many people that will empower you and give you a wise perspective on life. And putting yourself around a caring, loving family is probably one of the best peer groups to be involved with. So
That's
I
why.
would, and it's those kids, they're so cute, right?
They are.
For
They
those
are.
little kids and just shaping their personalities. That's a really beautiful thing too.
It really is. Also you took, so Iranian history very well too, and we could talk about that for hours. So I have to really kind of like, when I made this question, it was kind of like, this is going to be an interesting one because you understand the history, and people in the world. Now this is not a political show, but when I fight in kumites, I wear that flag around me of the Shah's era because I want people to understand that even though the Shah wasn't perfect, you had rights under him. And one of my last guests I had spoke about having assassination attempts on his family because of who they were. And I was talking and I said, I'll never understand that, but my great grandfather was under house arrest and could have been executed by the Ayatollahs because they lived in Tehran under the Shah's era. And I really think it's important people understand like how dangerous that regime is. They need to understand, Nima, that the Ayatollahs, they do not, it is not what Iran is. The Iran we know or understand is what the Shah did by westernizing it, giving the white revolution to women to have their suffrage, have the right to get education. So I want to ask you, where do you think the Shah ranks in Iranian history for you? And if the Ayatollahs were to leave, if ever, in a perfect world, how do you think Iran would rebuild and restructure itself?
The second part of your question is a lot harder than the first, to be honest. Okay, where does the Shah rank? It's all a matter of perspective. If you ask my family or if you ask us, it's pro Shah. You
Same with
know,
mine, by the way. Same with mine.
I'm not saying that's the right answer. It's just
No.
that was the experience we had, and there were people out there that will have good reasons to say that he wasn't that man, right? What we can say is this: in current history, Ataturk in Russia, in Turkey, and Reza Pahlavi Shah in Iran, they did so much to modernize their respective countries. Some people will say that they westernized it, they didn't modernize it, and they moved away too much from the cultural values. As a 44-year-old man that kind of looks at the world differently, I think it was it who was it that said the only constant is change? Well, I think maybe it was Marcus Aurelius, but we got to fact check that.
Yeah.
But the reality is the only constant is change. And we are changing from a human civilization. Every generation, every century, we have new ideologies and we have new things that we believe in and we have new ways of processing the world. And people are always afraid of the future, so they cling on and hold on to the past, right? And I think that it's a scary thing. I mean, especially because it's very easy to get nostalgic about the past and think that everything is always better about the past. I mean, even you said, hey, man, 2014 was the best era for fighting. I said, well, tell me that 10 years from now,
Yeah.
10 years from now, you might look back and be like, 2020 was great, So from a very moderate perspective, I will say this. The level of education went up during Shah's era. The level of construction and modernization of the roads and came up. My father owned one of the largest engineering companies in the civil engineering companies in the country when we were in Iran, and he said, Neems, Rome was not built in a day. All of those people that said that the country was not being built, we had so many projects building roads and dams around rural areas of the country, we couldn't keep up with it. We had a decade worth of work that we had to get to. It was nonstop. So they were making an effort to really push the country forward. And there was, I mean, and look, when you look at the group that left Iran, it was some of the most educated, entrepreneurial people. The Iranians that left after the revolution, it was like this mass exodus of really, really intellectual people. And whatever country they got displaced in, they made huge economic contributions to those countries, whether they immigrated to Sweden or America, or they became great. They're all lawyers, they're all doctors, they're all business people. Most of them, they don't have criminal records. Now, that was the first generation. The second generation, we'll see what happens because they're not going to be as Iranian, right? So if you want to look at it from that perspective, the Shah did a good job. Now let's kind of take it out of just looking at it from the Shah's perspective. I mean, what does any leader in that region have to deal with? They have to deal with thousands of years of culture. And they have to deal with a lot of culture that's not, I don't want to use the word enlightened, but they have a very different perspective on life, right? In the United States, we have a humanist perspective towards our ideologies. We look to the Constitution of the United States. In the Middle East, they look at religion. What do they have in common? The United States, they base their theories off of the Constitution, which is a one-page document that's supposed to be evergreen and last throughout centuries. So even though it was drafted in 1776, you can have opinions on nuclear warfare, abortion, because the document is so general that you can create an opinion on it. Now, what your opinion is going to be either a traditional opinion, a progressive opinion. It's all how you want to interpret that one page. The Bible, the Quran, and
the Torah and the Quran,
and the Bible, it's the same thing. It's a document that's so general that it can be interpreted in so many different ways. And by the way, it's not only is it general, but it was written centuries after the prophets were even alive, and it was translated how many times? You don't even know what you're reading today, how reflective it is to what was actually drafted thousands of years ago, right? So you don't even know what you're reading if it's really the word of God. And the second I tell you something and you tell somebody else what I tell you, it loses some of its meaning. Now imagine Muhammad tells somebody something and 70 years later they write it down on a piece of paper. And then they change the translation. The language that was spoken in the Middle East 2,000 years ago was not even the language that was spoken today. So you don't even know what you're believing in. But the ideologies is what the communication and the creation of fiction and to be able to tell stories and hearsay, it's what keeps a society binded. It's what moves the masses, is what creates structure. And it's very, very hard. Like going back in my bridge, being like the Shah, being in Iran, he wasn't just dealing with uplifting and empowering and modernizing his country. He was dealing with a cultural ideology that didn't want that. So, of course, it was a very hard thing that he did, and most visionaries have to deal with that. Some people say that he was not as strong as his father because people would disappear during his father's era. Like if you spoke against the government, you disappeared. And people said that he should have been more like his dad, more of a totalitarian regime, and people would have respected him, and maybe the country wouldn't have gone in revolution. You just don't know. You just don't know. What you can say is that the country did progress when he was around. What you can say is that he had a pure vision, but it might have not been what the region wanted, and maybe the region didn't necessarily want what was best for them, or maybe they knew better than him. It's all a matter of how you want to process and interpret the world. So sorry, it's not the answer that you were looking is not the answer that you were looking for.
No, it
So
was really good. It's a good one. It's yeah, like it's like I have a picture in my room of Sadat, Begin, and Jimmy Carter, and it's my favorite picture that my dad bought when he was in Europe because it shows that with martial arts, doesn't matter what background you come through, you can always find common ground with your adversary. And I think we need to be more united, especially today, regardless of the views you have, religion, political orientation. Like, and like that's why my coach and I get along so well because he's Muslim and I'm actually Jewish. My mother's Jewish. My father's the one who's Iranian Christian. And I look
you're,
at that photo. What?
you're the best of the mutts. Sorry, go ahead.
It's okay. Yeah, I get the best holidays. Trust me, I love it. Take advantage of it. Yeah, you got if you have Jewish friends, you got to take advantage of it. You got to play your Jewish cards sometimes, Nima. You got to learn how. You have some Iranian Jewish friends, I'm sure. You got to learn how to play the cards.
Sorry to interrupt you, but the fact
Oh.
that you have so many religions in your heritage shows that you come from a very progressive family.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm
go
more
ahead.
Jewish, yeah. But yeah, no, like it's my favorite picture because it just shows like how united we can be if we just take the time to like converse and listen to each other. And yeah, that's why like I love doing the show. And you know what, it's like when we first spoke, you said I congratulate you for taking that first step, and I just want to say when people hear this, I don't care about the views. I don't care about the likes or the plays. When people listen to you and I talk, if they can take something from this conversation and apply it to their life to become better, the better performer, better person, better, if they need to persevere through, say, depression, I did my job. I don't care about the white noise. It's nice when people come back to me, hey, I heard this conversation with so and so. That's what I want. If I can get two people or one person comes to me and say, hey, you know what? I'm an up and coming fighter. I want Nima Safapour to be my manager. How can you get in touch with them? That's what I care about. I want people to value from this. That's why I do this show, Nima. That's what I love about this.
Well, what you just described is an individual that's aspiring to be a social entrepreneur because you're trying to give back to your community with a skill set that you're good at, right? And you're navigating with a lot of purpose. And when you have those fundamentals, chances are you're going to be pretty successful at it.
Thanks, man.
Chances are you're going to be pretty successful because people really resonate with pure actions and authenticity, which is exactly what you just described.
Yeah, it really is. Like that's why like when people tell me like, "Oh, you got 20 episodes," I said, "So?" It's like, "So?" So you think I'm gonna rest on my laurels? I don't want to be Uncle Rico, being, "Oh, back in 2020, I made 20 episodes and then I stopped." No, it's like I'm gonna keep doing this. I don't know what this is gonna be parlayed into. It's gonna be something big, but I think we have the same mindset where it's like I just focus on the present, and then whatever happens in the present, that's what I create off of. And then 6 years from now, I can look back and say, "Wow, I was part of this." But yeah.
It's 20 episodes more than the person that thought about doing it and never did it.
Very true. I have another question here. So, a rapid fire now. Obviously, martial arts and culture.
Yeah.
You watch Cobra Kai? You watch Cobra Kai?
Yeah, I've seen all 3 seasons. Yeah, it's a good show.
I binged it. What's your prediction for season 4? Spoiler free. Says, what do you think's gonna? How do you think season 4 is gonna be?
I don't know. I mean, they've really set it up. I mean, they've really kind of created some kumbaya going on there with Richie and Johnny, like the whole a lot of what this seasons was about the conflict. So now we've got a lot of unity. I mean, I don't know where they're going to go, how much more they can go. We got something's going to have to happen in order for that synergy between Johnny and we're going to have to see Johnny and what's his name? Ralph Macchio's character, Johnny
Johnny and
Daniel.
yeah.
Yeah, they're gonna have to become friends because that's what we've been waiting for. They're gonna have to combine forces. That's what we've been waiting for. And then we've got to find a way to have them conflict and have conflict again, and have some drama. Otherwise we're gonna probably get tapped out in unit 4 in season 4. That'll be the finale.
It has to be. Honestly, man, I want to just personally say, thank you for taking the time. So if people want to connect with you, what are all the platforms? Because once this show goes up, as mentioned, if any amateur fighters coming up and they want to like get represented by you, I'd be glad to do as much as I can. I just want to do what I can to help you because I see this as a friendship because you said after we first spoke we're going to be talking more again soon. I just feel after today like I have a friend in you. I hope you see it the same way. Sir. And I'd love to do what I can to help Moments Management grow in any way.
That means a lot. Doing this helped. You can find us on Instagram, Neems01. That's my personal Instagram, or you can find us on my business Instagram, which is moments_MGMT. And just follow the fighters. If you're a fighter and you're good and you have talent and I can help, or my partner and I can help, send me a message and we'll go from there. Other than that, just as the cliche goes, be kind.
Exactly. Be kind. Is there anything you want to say like about what you liked about coming on the show today? Just because honestly, like you're the first manager. It means a lot to me because it's not every day you get a pro manager, and I felt I learned a lot. So yeah, is there anything you can give me advice to so I can improve as a martial artist, but also using this with martial arts?
Well, I thank you very much for giving me a platform to talk about my clients because at the end of the day, I'm the guy behind the guy. What everyone should really be caring about should be the clients that I represent. So I thank you very, very much for giving me that opportunity to talk about them and to do it in a very free way where I felt very authentic and true to myself and to their endeavors. I think you do a great job listening because I have a tendency of rambling. So I hope I didn't bore anyone in the process, but you have a great job of listening. And look, at the end of the day, you're doing this with a lot of purpose and with a lot of good vibes. So you just keep doing that. And you've got a friend in my organization, and we're going to do a lot of stuff together. And thank you very much. And just keep it going. Every single time you do one of these podcasts, you're doing one more than the guy that thought about doing it that didn't do it. And every time you do one, you're going to get better at it. And make sure make sure that you're both on YouTube as well as podcasts because people go to YouTube a lot. Are you on YouTube?
Of course, man. I have a channel. I hope you subscribe to it if you can. I'll send you the link when it's done. I'm doing everything, man. I hustle.
All right. Well, we'll have that channel. Have that channel too, and you're gonna spread like fire.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it, Nima.